Thank you. I'm very happy to be with you today. I'm also want to say hello to the people who I understand are watching this in New York and I guess around the world on the internet. Hopefully in those audiences there are some people I have met through the years since I have done tours for the public diplomacy section of the State Department, and I've also done briefings here in New York and in the past. I can't resist saying this is a very difficult time to do this briefing because the election was last week, so you know all the results, you know all the details of the election, and I'm not going to waste your time by going over those again. And it's also really the first day that Congress is back. That came in last night, but they're having votes today. But the Congress has not yet gone through is going through its elections of leadership at the present time. They will not choose new committee chairs until probably next week. So there is a limit to what I can tell you about what is actually happening in Congress. So as some of you may know, many years ago I wrote a book called The Book of America. I've covered all the 50 states. Today I spend a lot of time writing about agriculture in rural America. So I'm going to give you a kind of broad briefing and then hopefully can answer some of your questions. But what I most of all want to do is to put this election into a context. The first thing that must be said is, of course, it was a banner Republican year. There is just no question. The Republicans gained control of the Senate, and they have about 250 seats in the House of Representatives, which I believe is going to be their biggest number since World War II. We still do have 2 seats in the Senate that are up in the air, and that is most of all Louisiana, where there will be a runoff on the 6th of December. And in Alaska, the Associated Press has called the election for the Republican candidate, but the current Senator Mark Begich, the Democrat, is not willing to accept that result because there are so many votes out. This is because Alaska is such a huge state geographically and has all these remote rural areas. And the last I looked up on the internet, there were still 22,000 ballots not counted. And in addition to that, some more provisional ballots that were of questionable validity. And I think there's about 8,000 votes difference between the 2 candidates. So anyway, Senator Begich won't give it up yet. It is a remarkable election in that only 36% of the eligible voters voted in this election. That is the lowest voter turnout since World War II. And I think that's a reflection of the dissatisfaction of the American people with the state of the economy, with the leadership or lack of leadership that they say in Washington, with a Congress that has passed the smallest number of bills in decades, I guess. So it has just not been a very productive period these last 2 years. Now we will go into a period in which the Republicans control both the House and the Senate, and of course the presidency for the next 2 years will continue to be held by President Obama, who is a Democrat. So the question is, can they find ways to work together? Just a few more words on the election. In my view, in most cases, when the Democrats lost, they did have the weaker candidates. I believe that campaigns matter. And there were some mistakes that some of the Democrats made in some of these campaigns that indicated they were not the best candidates and maybe would not be the best office holders. And so some people don't like it when you say that because they are saying, well, you're sort of blaming the loser. Well, in a way, you have to blame the loser for losing the election. I think that's a fair statement to make. There were 2 states, however, in which I think that it was not a matter of whether the candidate was good, and that was in Arkansas and in Georgia. where those two states have kind of solidified their Republicanness in this era. I don't think that the Democrats could have had a better candidate in Georgia than they could have in Michelle Nunn. In Arkansas, you're talking about a sitting senator who was Mark Pryor, who I believe you could say got caught up in a Republican wave, and also a state, Arkansas, that had been trending Republican for a long time. Several years ago, I covered with the defeat of Senator Blanche Lincoln, who was chairman of the Senate Agriculture Committee. Pryor was chairman of the Senate Agricultural Appropriations Subcommittee. It doesn't seem to matter to Arkansas, even if they have people in power and they're Democrats. They want to push them out of office. And for a state that is as poor as Arkansas, that is a surprising trend, but it is a part of the trend there. I saw Kentucky a little bit differently. There, Allison Grimes was a very good candidate running against Mitch McConnell, but I think the election showed two things. If you have the Senate Majority Leader, the Minority Leader who might become the Majority Leader, are you really going to throw him out? And the second thing was that McConnell ran a very good campaign. Third thing would be that Kentucky is also a southern state, but it's a border South state, so it does go back and forth. I do want to point out for you, if you are looking for a Democratic victory, to me, the top one was a woman named Gwen Graham, who was elected to the House of Representatives in Florida, over Representative Steve Sutherland. And you might ask, why is that important? And the fact was that in the Farm Bill debate, it was Representative Sutherland who led the charge to make it tougher to get food stamps, our basic program that provides food to poor people, also known as the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. And he also wanted to impose work requirements on the people who get the food stamps. And so what happened in the end is that he got blamed for almost stopping the Farm Bill. In addition, Ms. Graham is the daughter of a former senator and governor of the state, and she was a very fine candidate. And I would say once again, I think this shows that usually the better candidate wins. Now, whether they become the good office holder is another matter. We don't know until they're in office. But that was an outstanding race. So what's happening now? Well, I don't know if you read the New York Times today, but the line that I loved from the story about what's going on Capitol Hill was that members came back yesterday, and the new members have arrived in town for their orientation. And the only people on Capitol Hill who seemed excited were the new members. The current members still see all the problems that faced the last Congress, all the divisions, particularly within the Republican Party, between the mainstream, or you might call them the moderate Republicans, the business-oriented ones, and the Tea Party ones who more often want to deal with social issues and also to try to embarrass President Obama as much as possible. So what's going to happen here? I don't know. I've certainly been interested in the fact that that Senator McConnell has said that he wants to govern. He wants to prove the Republicans can govern, and this is what would position them well for taking the presidency in 2016. And he said that on election night. Senator McConnell can come off like a grumpy old man, but he's been sort of a dreamboat in the last few days. That everybody's saying nice things about him. But you already have, people like Senator Ted Cruz and some of the Tea Party leaders out there saying, "Oh no, we don't want this cooperation to govern. We still want to push push hard on our agenda. So we'll still have to see about that. Of course, the issue that is coming up first is immigration. And there you have immigration reform, and there you have the White House and the Republican leadership still at loggerheads. And I think it's fair to say that the Obama administration made a mistake by not issuing its executive order on immigration before the election. They did it with the hope of keeping some of these Senate seats, which they were not able to keep. If you had had higher Latino turnout, it's possible that Senator Udall in Colorado would have won his reelection. There was very low Latino or Hispanic turnout in this election, very low turnout among the millennial voters, that's the young voters, who were responsible for, oh shoot, I'm sorry, I apologize. Yeah, better for me than for anybody else, yes. It's exactly the thing that I would be worried about if I were in charge, that somebody in the audience would do that. So forgive me. So anyway, now what we've got going on with immigration is that some people are saying don't do immigration until after the an omnibus appropriations bill is passed by December 11th in order to fund the government through next September. But the latest word is that President Obama may announce this next week. It's very hard to tell. The question is, how many? I just saw a story before I came here that it may cover 5 million immigrants. In my world of covering agriculture, there are people who are saying, don't forget the farm workers. Don't think just about the high-tech engineers and the people in high technology or the people who are living in cities. Don't forget those farm workers that are illegal and are so important to or undocumented and are so important to American agriculture. So I don't know what's going to happen on this. If we go into the next Congress, I think the most likely success would be in trade policy. For those, I cover trade as part of my coverage of agriculture. And for the last several years, I've been so happy it isn't the only thing I write about, because so little has happened. I'll just tell you this little joke. Before the World Trade Organization was established, there was this organization called the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, and people used to joke that it was the general agreement to talk and talk. And that's the way I have felt about trade in the last few years. But now you can already see, even during President Obama's trip to Asia, you can see some things coming together. For example, India and the United States reaching this agreement on the public stock holding of food that will allow the trade facilitation agreement to go forward in the WTO. There's another agreement, I think it's on information technology. There does seem to be progress on the Trans-Pacific trade negotiations. Not so much yet on the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. But you can see how these things could come together. And, I watched this with President Clinton when there are a lot of Democrats in the Congress who were opposed to trade, but he was able to work with the Republicans and get something and get what's now called Trade Promotion Authority. Or it wasn't so much that, but it was also that you could get agreements through to enforce new trade arrangements. And so I think that I could definitely see progress on trade more than anything else in the next few years. I do think this election positions the Republicans better for 2016 than they were before the election. Part of this is that once you get people in office, it's very difficult to unseat them. They usually get reelected. And so there has been a lot of talk about the fact that the Republicans will have a lot of Senate seats to defend in 2016, and that the Senate could go back into their hands, or into the Democratic hands in control. And I think that could easily happen, but maybe not so easily, because you now have more Republican senators. Quite a few of these Republicans who've gotten elected are fairly young, too. And that means they'll be vigorous on the campaign trail and probably could have long lives in politics. But the big things about the 2016 election year are, first of all, you have a much bigger voter turnout in an election year, in a presidential year. In this election, this midterm election, where you only had 36% of eligible voters voting, the electorate was whiter. It was more male. It was more male, more married women, fewer minorities. And in a presidential year, more people get interested and more people get involved. I saw a quote from one of the Republican leaders that for the Democrats to win in 2016, they have to be good. But for the Republicans to win in 2016, they have to be great. And I think that is true in terms of the cultural trends in the country and the demographic trends in the country. They do favor the Democrats, particularly considering some of the policies that the Republicans have taken on abortion and on gay rights and on immigration. So on 2016, on that I will leave you with one thought, and that is, as a reporter, every time we come to a presidential election year, what amazes me is how excited people get. You know, I have to admit, I've been doing this long enough that sometimes these subjects seem like retreads. I mean, I've been through this before. It doesn't matter. To the American people, it becomes an exciting part of our lives, beginning with the Iowa caucuses and the New Hampshire primary. So I would imagine in 2016 there will be lots of excitement. And I would say on the Democratic side, the greatest intensity comes from Democratic women who want to elect a woman president. And that, above all else, gives Hillary Clinton an advantage. And on the Republican side, I would say that after their 2016 victory, it is that they sense a chance to win after being out of office for 8 years. And so they too will be energized in 2016. One other thing about the Republicans is that they do seem to have a much better voter turnout mechanism now than they have for the last couple of elections. Now, because I said there's only so much I can tell you about what's going on in Congress, because we're at this point where they've just been elected, but they haven't really made any decisions. They haven't made any decisions about the lame duck and what they're going to do about funding the government. They haven't taken up any of President Obama's nominations yet, so I really can't tell you much more about that. So I'd like to make a few general comments that come out of my many years of reporting on the country. The biggest problem that I see here, and for the low turnout, for the mood of the electorate, and all of this, is the very sluggish wage growth in the country and also the income inequality. Jobs are increasing. All the statistics show that jobs are being created, but the problem is that people aren't being paid very much. They're just not they're not doing as well as they were 20 years ago, and that bothers people a great deal. The second thing is that the country is very divided. And that has to do, I think, with the fact that Americans are living they're living so differently, and I've got to explain that. I don't think that Americans have ever lived in so many different ways and been so insistent that they're going to live like that, and they're not going to be quiet about it. And I'm going to give you an example from something that has gone on at the National Journal where I've written. For many years, we covered the rise of what we call the New Right, of the social conservatives. And this was the trend. This was what was happening. And a few years ago, we published a story called The Rise of the Godless. And it was about the fact that within the military, there were young recruits who were very upset about the pressure that was being put on them to be religious. And what they were saying is that if you're in basic training and you got a pass for the weekend, and you would go into a town, and it just happened that the bus to take you back to the base at the end of the weekend was parked in front of an evangelical church. And this was because there were so many military officers who were evangelical. And so the pressure was, go to church before you get on the bus. Well, there were young people in the military who rebelled against this. And so they formed an organization. I don't know exactly what's happening with that organization today, but this whole idea that you have everything from the religious right to this rebellion against it is something different from the past. On a personal note, I will tell you that I have been going to the weddings of a lot of the children of friends of mine, and I'm surprised at the number of weddings that have no clergy whatsoever. It used to be that when people got married, even if they didn't feel religious, they would bow to their parents' desire to have a church wedding or to have or clergy at the wedding. And now people say, no, I won't do it if I don't want to. And on the other hand, of course, you still have the very, very religious people. And I would add into this, the rise of gay rights and the fact that gay marriage is becoming the law in more and more states. And you have this debate over whether is gay marriage something conservative or something liberal. If you don't believe in gay rights, well, it's something really radically liberal. But if you're conservative in a way, marriage is a conservative institution. So we have all of these trends going on in the country, but the message out of that is it makes a country that's harder to govern. It's harder to get people to come together around policy, I think. But most of all, I think the unhappiness with Washington, with people who are in office, that has to do with this sluggish growth and income inequality. But I want to note that I see this all over the world, but particularly in the developed countries. When I visit France, I look at the way that President Sarkozy was thrown out, and now the unhappiness with President Hollande. I was in Sweden this fall, where they have kicked out the conservatives, or what they would call the non-socialist government, and now they put in a social democratic government, but it's a very weak minority government. And in Sweden, immigration is a problem that the political establishment really doesn't want to deal with. So now they have a party that's quite focused on that. So I see these problems all over the world, but especially in the developed countries, because that's where the growth has been sluggish, compared to China and a few other countries where it's been much stronger. Maybe a final point here, or two final points I would make. I see, we have divisions between both within the Republican Party, but also within the Democratic Party. How far should you be going with these various policies? Although you don't see the divisions within the Democratic Party right now so much because they're smaller in number in office, so you're not going to see as much as that. Finally, we are at a kind of low point for the Obama administration. The president is not popular. People are not talking about this administration having accomplished anything. But I think that there will be a reevaluation. This is an administration that has accomplishments. I mean, first of all, you have to look at the Recovery Act that a lot of Democrats at the time said was not helpful, but it did maintain a lot of jobs around the country, and now we are seeing growth in employment. Secondly, there was the passage of Obamacare, which is still very controversial, but there are a lot of elements in that are popular. There are millions of people who have signed up for the policies despite the criticism of it. Obviously, there are the advances on gay rights. In my own particular field of covering agriculture these days, we have the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act, which is improving school meals, improving the nutritional quality of school meals all over the country. There's a Food Safety Modernization Act, which is bringing a higher level of food safety regulation on all kinds of foods. And so I think this is an administration with accomplishments. And I look back, for example, at the presidency of Harry Truman, and he was practically run out of town. And later people came to love him. Or think of Bill Clinton, who had so many controversies, but is now a revered senior statesman. So I think that the Obama administration and President Obama will be reevaluated. The question I have is whether the reevaluation will occur before he leaves office or after. So I will end on that note, but I'll be happy to take questions. And please tell me where you are, your name and where you're from.
My name is Per Meinert from DPA, the German press news agency. I have a very general question regarding foreign policy. It was not such a long time ago the U.S. was called the world policeman. That has somehow changed. And what do you think is Obama going to achieve in the next couple of years?
Well, first of all, I'm not a specialist in foreign policy. I'll take a stab at it, but there are probably lots of other people, lots of other briefers who could answer this better. I don't think there is much sentiment in the country right now for being the world's policeman. It is a role that a lot of people would agree that we have to play, even if we don't want to play it. But the last couple of situations have been very messy. I mean, Iraq, Afghanistan. And I think the great question about all these international involvements with the military is, well, what happens after a certain period of time? Is there a plan for the future? And I guess now I'm thinking back to after World War II, when there were lots of troubles in Europe, lots of fears that Italy and France would go communist, for example, and there was the Marshall Plan. But we don't have any, I mean, we're trying some nation building, but we really don't have anything in place that would satisfy a lot of people.
Thank you for doing this. My name is Tanaka from Japanese NHK TV. My question is on a presidential executive order you mentioned earlier. If he uses executive order, Mitch McConnell said it is like pouring poison into the well. But according to some of the US media, the president is going to use executive order sometime next week. What kind of scenario do you foresee if he uses executive order in the lame duck session between the president and the Congress? Thank you.
Well, if he uses the executive order, I think the real issue is between the president and the American people. Because if he puts out an executive order And the Congress says they're going to try to reverse it through the appropriations process. Or it's also possible that the president could be sued on the grounds that he overstepped his power. Then you have to see what the American people have to say about this. To me, the biggest complication that you have with immigration is that you have all these immigrants all over the country, and they're known to people, and if they're known on an individual basis, people don't want to kick them out. They may know them as workers, they may know them as neighbors. For a lot of Hispanic citizens of the United States, they are relatives or they are friends or people that they go to church with. And so I don't know what the reaction is going to be. I think the Congress, to a degree, is going to have to follow whatever public sentiment there is at the time they're considering action.
My name is Bingru Wang with Hong Kong Phoenix TV. I want to ask about your reaction on yesterday. Two congressional leaders, they had strong criticism on the recent China-US deal on climate change. How serious is their concern and threat? And on TPP, how do you expect GOP-controlled Congress will favor the TPP's negotiation? Thank you.
Well, on climate change, yes, the Republicans criticized the president. The editorial pages of the country generally praised the agreement. Unfortunately, climate change has become a partisan hot-button issue. And so, to me, what happens on climate change is that you just kind of go lurching along, doing a little bit. The best summary that I can give of climate change is something that I heard about the farmers that I write about. The farmers, if there's just a poll out the other day, farmers do not believe as much in that climate change is real. They don't believe climate change is real compared to other people. But then you get to, why do they say that? It's because they don't want to do anything. If they think that they don't have to do anything about climate change, then they're willing to acknowledge its existence. And that, to me, is the problem that we have. Is that people just don't want to change their lives, or they also they don't want to make the changes because they think that developing countries won't make the changes, and in the end, the changes the United States would make would only hurt us economically, while the developing countries would go along with their high growth economies. And TPP. I think the Republican Congress is going to be very excited about TPP. It's the Democrats in Congress, with allies in the labor unions and in some parts of agriculture that are worried about what TPP might mean. So, to a degree, with TPP, it matters on whether Japan makes some concessions on agriculture, because Japan is the biggest country in the agreement. And so American agriculture really wants more access to the Japanese market, but there seems to have been some progress on that recently, and there's a pretty strong acknowledgement now that American agriculture is not going to get everything they want out of Japan, but they may have to accept some increased market access, but not getting rid of the tariffs that they want to get rid of.
Connor Sislo, Asahi Shimbun. So I wanted to ask about TPA, and do you think the Republican Congress is basically just going to pull out the old Baucus Camp bill from a desk drawer? Are they going to introduce a new bill or make some small modifications like Wyden was talking about? How influential do you think Wyden is going to be in the process, assuming he keeps his position on the Senate Finance Committee? And do you think the White House is going to have to get more involved in pushing for TPA than it has been up until now? Thank you.
Well, since you're talking about how influential Senator Wyden will be, I'm just going to mention something as a reporter. I suppose this is a bit of advice. But the thing that I've always noticed is when there's a change of party control in Congress, that as a reporter, my first inclination is to still go to the people I have been talking to who have been in power. And they do lose power. And you do have to start asking, I guess it's Senator Hatch who's going to head Senate Finance. You have to start asking him what he's going to want. I think that in terms of Senator Wyden's influence, it's going to depend on how many Democratic votes the Republicans think they need to get TPA passed. I don't know enough about the details of the TPA bill to say how similar it will be to the Wyden bill or the Baucus bill. We'll just have to wait and see next. We'll have to wait and see next year, and then of course there's the question of what does the House want on TPA. But in the end, yes, the administration it will have to get involved for the simple reason that it has to be a TPA that they can live with, that they feel that they can actually execute and use in the trade negotiations.
Hi, Narayan Lakshman of The Hindu. Sorry, I came in a bit late, so I just caught the tail end of what you said on immigration reform, and I just heard you say that Congress or Republicans would have to be responsive to the public mood or sentiment. I'm particularly...
That's if President Obama issues an executive order.
Right.
Yeah.
So in that case, or even without an executive order, what do you see as the fate of the Senate, the former Senate proposal by the Gang of Eight on immigration reform? Is that dead in the water, or how does the specific Republicans who are in power now, how will they shape that, or will they start from from scratch?
Well, first of all, you're talking about the bill the Senate passed, right? All legislation dies at the end of this Congress if it hasn't been passed, and so the Senate bill is just gone at the end of the year, and you have to start over. So I don't know how it would be. I mean, they got it through this time. I'll give you a dream scenario, and that is President Obama puts out his executive action. And there is so much, and he says that he will rescind it if the Congress acts. So then they suddenly decide in the lame duck that they're going to push the Senate bill in some form or some bill through the House, and then they actually do an immigration bill before the end of the year. I don't think that's going to happen, but that's a kind of dream scenario. But otherwise, I'd say the Senate bill is dead, and they'll have to start over, but it would certainly be the case that a lot of what they have accomplished, and they did a lot of work on that bill, that they would be able to use elements of it in whatever they would do in the future. But I don't have a great deal of faith that a Republican Congress is going to pass immigration reform.
Right
this
here.
gentleman hasn't.
Yeah.
Oh, no, or maybe, well,
Yeah.
anyway.
Okay.
Hi, Jacob Vader with Japanese newspaper Yomiuri Shimbun. How much of the discord and difficult relations between the administration and Congress right now do you think is due to the diversity and multiple groups that you were describing in the country? And how much of it do you think is due to the personalities we have in the White House and in Congress, and just the method of operating that the administration has taken toward Congress?
Well, President Obama hasn't shown that he is someone who really likes to hang out with members of Congress. He has his strong points, but that's not one of them. So maybe you can start with that. And then there are these personalities in Congress, and I would say, unfortunately, we as journalists tend to write about the most colorful, outrageous ones. And so they do get an probably inappropriate level of publicity. I have found personally that behind the scenes there are quite a few Republican House members who really do want to govern and who will take actions very quietly to try to govern as well as possible, but they don't want their constituents to know about it because they are afraid that they will be, and to use the American expression, primaried. One thing I didn't mention about the Republican election, or that I should have said, but I would imagine other briefers told you this in the last week, is that the Republican Party did do a fantastic job of eliminating the most outrageous candidates. They did not have the problem that they had in 2012. They got better candidates this time, and I think that's one of the reasons they were able to win so many seats.
You want to ask?
Just really quickly, how seriously do you think the Republicans are going to be in trying to repeal or roll back Obamacare? Will it be like a token effort so they can say they tried, or are they really going to go after it?
I don't think they're going to, I don't think they're going to succeed in repealing it. The question is whether they can change it. I think the biggest issue with Obamacare is not what's going on in Congress, but this Supreme Court decision that is pending on the definition of the word state, and whether it means the individual states or it means it's just a term meaning the state, meaning the country. And that if the Supreme Court ruled one way, then that would mean that it would be much harder to provide the subsidies. If you, for example, I think if you tried to get rid of the provision in Obamacare that says that insurance companies can't consider pre-existing conditions, or you tried to get rid of the provision that allows people to keep their children on their health insurance policies until they're 26, I think you'd have an enormous public outcry against this. So the Republicans do have to be careful with this, and I do think the Democrats and the Democrats on the White House are going to defend Obamacare because this still is the most significant achievement of the Obama administration and these recent years.
Will foreign policy be a bigger deal in 2016 election? I know during 2012 we saw a lot of Romney pieces that were criticizing China. Do you think that will crop up again in 2016, or that the Republicans have decided to do away with that strategy?
I think, well, in terms of China, are you referring to the economy, or are you referring to, there's always the potential for criticizing China due to the economy, because there is this view that so many jobs have shifted to China, questions about how China runs its economy. So I think that I'm sure there will be some attempts to say get tough with China on whatever policies are controversial at that time. The larger issue that's hard is, to what degree has the Obama administration pivoted to Asia? What is the competition between the United States and China for influence in Asia? These they're harder questions to formulate for a voter to think about. That's pretty tough. So I don't know what will happen there. Of course, on the other issue of foreign policy, there's always a potential for blow-ups in the Middle East. There's Syria, Israel, all those things. It's very hard to predict because it depends on what's going on at the moment.
Quick follow-up on the U.S.-China climate change deal. What the options Republicans have in Congress to make it harder for the administration to implement those policies?
I don't think they have many options to stop that. I mean, they can try. The Republicans in Congress talk a lot about trying to restrict EPA and what they would, in the Environmental Protection Agency, and what they would do. But it's very hard for Congress to have a real impact on an agreement like this. Sorry, I don't have any more details for you.
No more. Thank you for coming in today. Thank you.
Thank you.